future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey everybody, welcome to Raging Chickens, Out to Coop Live. It's normally this is our Monday show, but we've got a special carve out of the week for you, and hope we're going to be doing a lot more of these too in the days to come. Going right to our YouTube channel, we're doing live. This is Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. Now, Out to Coop Live here, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts from our own backyards from around the country. We, on Fridays, you might be tuning into our regular podcast. We've been told to say our flagship podcast. That's on Fridays when I talk to Sean Kitchen, where we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. But you can get both of these, Out to Coop Live and our flagship podcast, by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And I'll tell you right now, for those folks who are tuning in on our YouTube Live for today, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that bell so you know every time that we go live so you don't miss anything out of content, what's happened right here on Raging Chicken. And you can help support this show by becoming a patron by as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress. And if you're listening to this show right now on YouTube, feel free to kind of jump into our comment section. We'd love to take your questions and comments a little bit later on in the show. It'd be absolutely fantastic. And if you're looking for more PA progressive talk, you can always tune into the Rick Smith Show. Rick Smith Show live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube channel, on Twitter and Facebook. Wherever basically you stream anything live, that's where Rick is. You can also tune into his daily podcast wherever you get your podcast. That's the Rick Smith Show. Great labor-oriented show. What I've said to everybody is when I first moved to Pennsylvania, everything I learned about PA politics, I learned from Rick Smith. So, that's fantastic. Rick's show is a national show. He's on Free Speech TV and all that stuff. But he's a fantastic guy. I also want to give a shout out for all the gamers out there to check out the Game Inn, right? That's Game Inn with 2 N's, right? That's located right on 309 in Quakertown. The Game Inn is a Quakertown-based, black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show and awesome folks all around, right? The family of one of my son's best friends. They're freaking awesome people. The Game Inn has almost every gaming product you can imagine, retro N64s to Nintendo DS's, PS4s to the Switch. You got video games for all platforms, new and used, large collection of collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops. Literally, you walk into the store and there's a wall of Funko Pops that you swear is going to collapse upon you, right? Which is phenomenal. So do check them out. And if you got kids, the kids get a discount for every A on their report card. Check them out on their Facebook page. You'll get this in the show notes. Follow them on Twitter at the Game Inn. That's the Game Inn with 2 N's. You got a question about a game, looking for something hard to get, message that on Facebook. Drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com, or give them a call at 267-424-2535. And you check them out online at thegamein.com. Special shout out to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page, and follow him on Twitter at SongADayMan, again, with 2 N's. It's kind of a little theme we got going here today. At SongADayMan on Twitter. Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you, I'm totally psyched about today. On Out to Coop Live today, we are welcoming Jordan Hopkins to the show. Hopkins is a 23-year-old writer, editor, and independent journalist located in Philadelphia. He's been covering PA's right-wing extremists and the grift at the core of the emerging Patriot Party. Literally, it's if you could set up something that is about just kind of watching people steal money from other people, it's here you go. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly what it is. And we'll be digging into his latest article called The Party of Grifters and the Rise of Extremism in the PA more broadly. You can check out all his great reporting at www.itsalienmuse.com. That's itsalienmuse.com. You'll see it in the show notes today. You can also follow him on Twitter at jhop_PHL. That's at jhop_PHL. Then it's J, the letter J, HOP_PHL. Welcome to the show, Jordan.
Hey, Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I'm psyched to be here as well.
And I was like I said to you before we hopped on today, is I've been seeing your stuff starting to pop up in my feeds, I know for a little while now, and when I saw your piece come out, like at the Party of Grifters, I'm just like, man, I just got to see if I get this guy on the show because, as you may know, listeners of the show certainly know that, we've been at Raging Chicken, we've been covering white supremacists and the rise of right-wing extremism, going back to 2016 and before then, and kind of shouting on the rooftops, basically like, these folks are not going away, right? The whole idea, like, ignore them, they're going to go away, is not going to happen. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think that, I've been covering the far right in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania for about 6 months now. I started, right in the middle of the BLM protests. Last summer was when I really started to get involved. And it really does start to feel a little while like you're the only one like wearing a tinfoil hat, where like you're trying so hard to like tell people that this is the problem. And then the things happen that you said were probably going to happen. And you can only just be like, we've been, talking about it for a significant period of time now.
Well, and it's the worst kind of "I told you so," right? Because you're like, I
didn't want to be right.
No. I didn't want people to have to get beaten in the streets and to say like, I told you so. I mean, that's a feeling, completely unsatisfying feeling, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I just as like a little bit of background, I started covering Philadelphia in general as it started during the BLM protests. I moved here about a year and a half ago, and I love the city and to see I guess the event that really like brought it into focus for me was me and a couple of my friends and my housemates were at the Marconi Plaza protests right in the middle of that. I think that was like the beginning of June. And watching, we had heard reports that the Proud Boys were going to be there. And I didn't really know anything about the Proud Boys at that point, just from what I'd been following in Portland, but they weren't, nearly like the kind of national story that they are today.
Right.
And so, we heard that they were going to be there. It's like, oh, Proud Boys are coming, but actually like having gone there and seeing what it started with a live stream video that I think a lot of people have seen of the Unicorn Riot reporters who were there, who had their tires slashed had their bike tires slashed by Proud Boys there. And then the next day we were there because of what had happened to Unicorn Riot. We wanted to be there to support journalists who were, covering this stuff. And we watched, 50 or so Proud Boys just turn that protest into a riot. And it was then that I was very convinced that, this is something that needed to be covered. And as we got more into it, I recognized that it was a pattern that was developing all across Pennsylvania, over the last, like, mostly since the Trump election, but digging way back before then. And seeing it culminate in the January 6th riots where, Pennsylvania has the second most amount of participants arrested from that event.
Right.
It is very, very common for people from Pennsylvania to be involved in these things and to have been radicalized, at Harrisburg protests or at GOP events in the Philadelphia area. And that is definitely something that needs to be focused on. So, we just kind of want to like create like a network of community journalism that is covering these people who are dangerous,
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, we didn't really talk about this like before the show here, but I mean, you just made me think of this. That whole idea that, you're noticing what's going on right around you, right? You're noticing that there's these groups that are kind of emerging, and then you've got other folks who are just, you described it as like wearing the tinfoil hat. I mean, how did people respond to you when you first started kind of ringing the bell and kind of shining a light on this stuff and say, hey, we need to be paying attention to this stuff?
And I continue to cover it because it's something that people really want, in their coverage, especially in Philadelphia, in West Philly and in South Philly. I've had people follow me and be like, hey, we've been following this stuff for a long time. It's not just the Proud Boys. There are reactionary groups and people, all across those areas who, the community has been very concerned about for a long period of time. And, going back to what before that I was covering, in 2018, there were the We the People rallies that had like, people like Ethan Nordine was here, Alan Swinney, a world like, nationally known Proud Boys now. But, in the past, and we spoke about this a little bit off camera, but there, the input that we kind of got was, just ignore them, don't give them any airtime.
Right.
They all they want is attention. And while I think that's true, I think that not giving them attention allows them to continue to develop into like the violence that we saw explode, during the BLM protests and on J6, all those things are connected by them being allowed to foster from not getting the coverage that they probably deserve.
Yeah, I remember when we had when we were pointing out this stuff again back in 2016, 2015, 2014, starting to notice this stuff. Sean Kitchen in particular did a whole bunch of reporting, about what was actually going on. We had, I teach at Kutztown University too as well, and we were one of the universities that was targeted by that white supremacist group called Identity Europa, right? And like again, you start showing people this Identity Europa stuff with all this kind of they use all this Greek imagery and stuff, and you try to tell people that this is a real thing, and they're kind of like, it's just a couple of jokers online, right? And you're like, no, these people are very serious about building out an infrastructure, and again, not to say that they're all 100% exactly the same. I mean, there's these weird divisions on the kind of the far right too as well when it comes to how far down the QAnon path are you, and how far down are you on the white nationalist path. I mean, it's kind of like pick your brand of extreme republicanism in the country right now. But yeah, I mean, agree. I mean, I'm so glad. This is one of the reasons I'm so glad that you're covering this stuff, because it feels like it's moving extraordinarily fast, right? I think what we've seen under the kind of the Trump administration, in particular in the lead up of the election, is that these groups seem to be, say, jockeying for a position within the say the cultural mainstream, even if not all of them can get in the political mainstream. And I'm just thinking about the last week, you got all these kind of these right wing folks in Congress at the national level, entering all their Zoom calls with fully automatic weapons behind them, as kind of like, hey, welcome to democracy, or else, it seems.
Enjoy the guns.
Enjoy the guns.
And I think that if there's something that I've learned covering this, it's that the internet, people can say, it's silly. They're cosplayers, they're LARPers, they're just dudes online who are, posting like Identity Europa stuff, like you said, exactly, like things that might seem silly. But like, there's one thing that I've learned is that nothing is, everything that's on the internet is real life too. These people exist in real life. They're
yep.
organizing in real life. And if, it might not necessarily be something to be concerned about, but there is a point where it becomes something that you need to be concerned about, because it's not just online. If the Capitol riots showed us anything, it's that, these people are telegraphing what they're going to do online and then doing it in real life. And that's a process that's built up over the last several years. But like you said, like that cycle is accelerating. QAnon, the scale at which that it grew is absurd. I mean, you have going from a few people posting on 4chan in 2017 to the Capitol riots in less than 3 years. And and QAnon, it's broken apart right now. A lot of the Republican Party is restructuring after the Capitol riots, and it's not quite clear what is going to become the new big tent. And it's probably not going to be QAnon, because they're being ridiculed for being false prophets in a lot of different groups. But there is something that is going to come and band these people together again. And it might not be the Patriot Party, because there are definitely conversations in online circles that honestly center more around the Patriot Party is not radical. It's not
exactly.
It's not a third position, but it is something to keep an eye on, because when this restructuring happens and coalesces, it's going to happen like that. It's going to be extremely fast, and it's going to lead to real world consequences very quickly. So we need to be focusing very hard on the things that we believe are the next step to that, that recoalescence, whether it's in 2022 or 2024.
Excellent. Well, this is a great setup, because I want to dig into your piece a little bit here, because what you just mentioned there, when you're talking about, you say the next thing that comes around, it might not be the Patriot Party, right? And I think that this is one of the difficulties in reporting on these things, right? It's like you have this thing that it might turn out that this just is a complete flop, and it is absolutely nothing but a grift. On the other hand, right? It's like if you take, well, I mean, what people in the, I don't know, even 4 years ago were saying, well, in the kind of 1 in 100th chance that, well, we're no longer in the 1 in 100th chance anymore. It's almost like a coin flip at this point about where where things are going to land. So let me set up for people who have not checked out his piece yet. Like, again, I kind of 100% encourage you to kind of get over to itsalienmuse.com. That's itsalienmuse.com. Check out all his stuff. Read this for yourself. You get the link in the show notes. But I wanted to kind of like set the stage for folks who haven't had a chance to read this yet. I want to pull a couple paragraphs, read a couple paragraphs from your piece, and then kind of hand it over to you a little bit to kind of walk us through kind of what you're doing in this piece and why you're focusing on this, these individuals in particular, and kind of what they're doing in the state. So here's the setup. So now deplatformed and fully radicalized, tens of millions of Trump supporters wandered the internet wastes looking for a new grift to hitch their wagon to. Can I just say you're a freaking great writer too? I just want to just
thank
say
you.
that. Was what I was saying. I want to get that out of the way here too as well. I mean, I enjoy reading your stuff too, which is all good. But anyways,
that means a lot. That means a lot.
Yeah, I really do. So here you go. The American right is in a period of flux with Western chauvinists, neo-Nazis, QAnon supporters, and run-of-the-mill MAGA conservatives all huddling together in the same Telegram chats as the dust settles. It's impossible to say what the end result of this atomization will be or what the next incarnation of American fascism will look like. What we do know for sure is that we have very little time to react when we do find out. After all, it took less than 3 years for QAnon to go from a few people following Q drops in 4chan, like you were saying, to a dangerous mass delusion, and there's every indication that this cycle will only accelerate. Already, less than a month after Biden administration took power, a new political entity is beginning to form, a movement that has the capability to swallow up and further radicalize the base of former MAGA coalition. Conservatives, evangelicals, Proud Boys, QAnon, and constitutionalists all gathered together under one big tent once again, this time turning their numbers toward disrupting the very core of the American electoral system. Joined together by their support for former President Donald Trump and very little else, the new Patriot Party is ascendant among the American right. So there's the kind of setup. So take us into kind of this piece and what you're kind of laying out for all of us.
Sure. So when I was writing this piece, I spent a lot of time, too much time probably. I have a hyper deficit disorder. I tend to focus on these things, and I spent a lot of time in the Telegram pages after the January 6th riots, because what happened was the platforms that these people are normally on, Twitter, Facebook especially, had just finished their great purges, where they dropped a lot of QAnon believers, they dropped a lot of Trump supporters, they obviously banned President Trump from Twitter, which was a huge deal. And so Telegram was kind of the place that they went, because frankly, Telegram has a long history of supporting, far right-wing movements in terms of free speech. They deleted a lot of channels semi-recently, but they're mostly all back now. They don't actually, do any policing on that stuff. And so it was interesting to see them all kind of gathered together in one place. And I was able to kind of, get an idea of what the coalescence was looking like. And more I was seeing Patriot Party stuff. And it had been talked about, kind of like as a joke in like the lame duck period where, people were like, we're going to form our own political party. And they were handing around, and you've probably seen it by now, the Be Dare lion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is directly ripped from a white supremacist website. Yep. Like the Trump campaign used it once, but it's the Be Dare lion. It's very common in those circles of Trump supporters. And so I was kind of like, this seems like with the collapse of QAnon, QAnon was kind of the big tentpole crazy faction. They were the most radical adherents. They were the most dedicated. They were the most likely to do things in real life. And so with that, kind of breaking apart, there are still some QAnon believers, but they've mostly changed their beliefs, in the shape of, after Biden got elected. And, now it's kind of an open field where it's like, the Proud Boys are under attack, QAnon is under attack, people don't like MAGA people anymore. And so they're kind of trying to figure out, what their next steps are. And like I said, like with QAnon, it was so fast because all of these people were online and being radicalized online at, so much faster than anything we've ever seen.
Well, on this point too as well, let me about the quickness of it and how this might seem like it's just kind of like a joke or just kind of like a floated idea that's randomly out there. What was also kind of like a floated idea, which seemed like a joke at first. The Space Force, right?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
I mean, it sounded like a good idea. Let's see what's happening. Lo and behold, here we are, right? And the same kind of stuff that we see, this is possible moving forward too as well. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
No. You make a good point. There is no differentiation between online and real life anymore. It's the same thing because things that happen online have consequences in real life. And, it is easy, I think, to ignore QAnon and Boogaloo and all these like weird miasma of the internet ideas, but they have weight. And, we've seen it would be disastrous of us not to learn this lesson. We've seen incel shootings. We've seen QAnon believers taking action in real life. There are dedicated MAGA supporters who are doing things in real life. This is a pathway to radicalization. And people have been saying this for years, since Gamergate, basically, is where you can trace the line back to. But, with the quickness with which everyone was banned and those communities fell apart, Telegram was really the only place to go to. And so everybody's there now. And when I mean everybody, I mean, you have totally normal run-of-the-mill MAGA supporters, your grandma, your aunt, your uncle, they, lots of QAnon in there, but also Proud Boys and Boogaloo Boys and Patriot Front and Groypers, all these distributed platforms of radicalization, and they're all fighting for those people who aren't as fully radicalized as they are.
Well, and
so
I should say about this too as well, just to give you a sense of kind of the way that we have this kind of like fractured media landscape too as well, which we'll get into a little bit later too. But when you say everybody is on Telegram, I guarantee you, right, there's a vast majority of Americans out there have no idea what Telegram even is. Right.
Absolutely.
Which is precisely the issue you're pointing to, right? What's happening online is precisely real life when it comes to this organizing, and we can't see it, or at least the vast majority of people, like Americans, don't see it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why, work, the anti-fascist work and in terms of, far-right extremist reporting is very important, because it takes a lot of time to build up the kind of knowledge that is necessary to track these groups.
Yeah.
And it's not something that, mainstream news is flexible enough to do. Things happen so fast on the Patriot Party coalesced in less than 2 months. And they're now having rallies, they're running for city government and state government. And that's not something that you can just kind of hop into. You have to have access to the channels, and you have to have, been there while they build up, because, now, I've been following, a few Patriot chats for a while, and with the increased coverage, like, it's become clear to them that there are, infiltrators, Antifa infiltrators and people who are watching those chats. And so eventually those are going to go private. And it's important that someone be looking for as long as possible so that they can continue to track that pathway. Because Telegram is a new addition to the radicalization pipeline, but it's not a new service. They're just jumping to whatever is most convenient for them and whatever is the least censored. So they want as much like freedom to pitch their right-wing propaganda to unradicalized people as possible. And so it's important for local journalists to be covering it and to have people covering it explicitly, so that when big stories do break and national reporters are covering this, that they have something to build on, and be able to access that knowledge in one place. And that's really what I try.
This is something that we use this concept, right? When we first started publishing Raging Chicken, like the whole idea, we had this idea about break and push, right? And the idea was that obviously our platform is not kind of like a national platform, but what we have access to are the kind of like the local machinations of what's actually happening. And by building relationships with these broader platforms, is that once you're able to break something that nobody else has got there, you're going to push it to those relationships to try to kind of give it some more exposure beyond it, right? And thinking about really like a media ecosystem that works in that kind of way is absolutely so critical, because one of the things that's so important about the reporting that you've been doing, it's not like, I think it's making its way into enough of the mainstream now, like the mainstream press and kind of even like statewide press, that we have a problem with white supremacy, right? We have our white nationalists, right? There's these extremists, right? That's true. However, the reporting that you're doing is actually getting us into like, this is who we're talking about. This is where they are and what they're doing, right?
Exactly.
Because that's the part that's been missing for so long, as kind of local newsrooms have been gutted, right? There is no budget anymore for kind of investigative work. And so it only takes people who are kind of like really motivated, right? To actually dig into this stuff, to be able to expose some of the stuff, because that's really where it matters, because you want to stop them before they get out of the city council, right? Not
Absolutely.
like 5 years down the road.
No, absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head. What I've tried as I've developed as a journalist, what I've just like kind of thought that my role has been, I think that when you're covering far right extremism, specifically, you are doing a community defense as journalism. So these are people who are dangerous in your communities. They're not just people who show up to the Capitol riots.
Right.
They are dangerous in their own communities. And so as locals, you want to be able to provide that coverage to, like you said, like push and break to larger networks where, you have the capability to say, here's the information that I've gathered. Now, Zach Rail is at the Capitol riots. I can just push that right out to you. And you can have that local investigative reporting without, like, obviously, like, it's not ideal that they're not having, that they're gutting local papers, but like that information has to get out to people. And like, I think that that's, the role that we provide. And I think you made a great point about a media ecosystem, because there's great people all across Pennsylvania doing great work. And we've been, finding each other, there's Crow LV, who are up in Lehigh Valley, and they're doing fantastic work.
Yep.
Spotlight PA down with you guys in Harrisburg and Raging Chicken have been doing fantastic stuff. And if we work together, we can create, a base of knowledge for people to work off of.
100%. I can't tell you how long I have been kind of like barking up that tree. Right. And to say that, I mean, one of the lessons I think, I mean, again, we're going to come back to this once again, kind of a little bit later. But one of the things that I think is so critical is that one of the lessons we can learn from what happened with the right is that you talk about this really network of kind of interdependence and kind of mutually supporting folks doing the work. Yes, they've got billionaires and things like that. I get that we don't necessarily have those folks who want to donate to the left on this score. Right. But the way that this kind of the ecosystem works, right, it becomes that much more important for those on the, from my view, at least for those of us on the left, to do things like this, right, where we're kind of like cross-platforming and making sure that we're kind of amplifying and using what we have to get this kind of message out, right? Because there is nothing more critical in my mind for, what's happening right now, the crises that we happen, and they're happening, like you said, in our community. Pennsylvania sent like the second largest number of people to these Capitol protests, and you know what? They didn't just kind of appear at the Capitol and then come back to Pennsylvania as Pennsylvania. They were here before doing that work in our communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a great example because when the riots happened, I dedicated a lot of time to open source intelligence work. Mm-hmm. I was working with people on Twitter to try and locate and identify individuals who had committed crimes like during the Capitol riots, like through video and through anything that was openly available to journalists. And we spent a lot of time focusing on this guy who people called the Gray Pack, who had thrown a fire extinguisher at a police officer. And at the time we thought that it was Brian Sicknick. It turned out not to be. But it was still, incredible piece of open source intelligence work. And it turned out he's from Chester. Yeah. Like it was like 25 minutes away. And I was like, this guy lives down the block from me.
Yeah.
That's and they are not only violent insurrectionists when they're at the Capitol. They are doing violence to people in their daily lives. It's very common among the people who are involved here. And so if someone lived down the street from me who threw a fire extinguisher at a cop's head, I'd probably want to know about it. And, that's the kind of community awareness that we're trying to provide. Knowing who these people are makes our communities safer. And I think that that's critically important, even if, you might not have a big, Tribune publishing or whatever behind you. It's still a difference that we can make.
100%. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about these, you focus on kind of like two individuals in particular, three, if we want to make an argument, two individuals in particular in here that you kind of take us in. Why these folks, and what did you see happening? The stories that these two people are telling us.
Sure. I think that, the two people are Richard Schwetz, who is the leader of the Lehigh Valley Proud Boys, and Dave Stukowski, who is on Facebook as Dave the Patriot. And
he's based out of really Philadelphia, right?
Characters. Yeah, he's right here in Philly. Yep. And they're really interesting characters, although they are very different, because I think they represent two diametrically opposed futures for the Patriot Party. Richard Schwetz, who is someone, candidly, that I've covered for a few months now. He was at, the Marconi Plaza protests and participated in those street fights as a member of the Philadelphia Proud Boys. And, he was at the event in West Philly that they were trying to launch. And he was also at the Old City Flash March. All that information is in my Twitter. And you can go through the history there, but he's someone that I'm very familiar with. And he actually came up on my radar for J6 because he actually wasn't at the DC Capitol. He was in Harrisburg at the state capitol. And I think that the radicalization that is happening at the Harrisburg State Capitol roundups is incredibly underreported and incredibly important, because so many of the people who are involved there have become, really violent right-wing extremists. And Schwetz is one of them. He is on video assaulting journalists at DC rallies before J6. He is on Parler lying about Zach Rail showing up to the Capitol riots, which if Rail is arrested makes Schwetz a co-conspirator. Those are serious crimes.
Yep.
And he has proven time and time again that he's, someone who is actively working to radicalize people and to get them to join the Proud Boys. He's a very proud boy and like really wants people to be involved. Yeah, right, exactly. But it's, you know, he is someone who might not have been there, but is arguably more radical than some of the people who were there, and he has a much larger part to play in the Patriot Party, because he is one of the few people in Pennsylvania who are running for state government under the Patriot Party. I've gone in the financial records. I've gone to the campaign commissions. It does not seem like he's signed up for any kind of financial disclosures for his campaign. On his Telegram page where he announced that he named the wrong congressional district, also the wrong opponent.
I've got that circled on the article. I was like, wait a minute, that's not the 44th. It's like,
I'm not, great with this kind of stuff. Maybe I did the wrong research. Maybe I didn't get what I needed to get, but it sure seems like he's not really running for Congress.
Well, no. Like he says the 44th, and like it only takes like a Wikipedia page away to see that that's the 9th that he's talking about. Exactly. It was bizarre.
Dumb.
Yes.
He's not. Yeah. But like what I think he's doing, regardless of whether or not he's running for office, is he's perpetuating the grift of the Patriot Party. He's selling T-shirts, he's selling hats, he's selling all this memorabilia with like his funny little campaign slogan on them about how funny he thinks it is that his name is Dick Schwetz. And he continues to basically use it as a platform to vet people for his Proud Boys chapter in Lehigh Valley, which is a tactic that he learned from Zach Rail. Zach Rail and his Proud Boys were extremely well known for bringing in reactionary groups. That's why they went to Marconi. They went to talk to the reactionary South Philly Italians who were there, and they picked up several members from those rallies. Sal Conti is a member. He was involved in the Marconi Plaza rallies. That was the first time that Schwetz came down. So it's a tactic that is growing in the Proud Boys, and even like you can look in other Patriot Party groups. The New Jersey one is overrun with Proud Boys. They are using this big tent as a proving ground and a vetting space for Proud Boys, and that's something that he is like very actively involved in, and that's why I decided to cover him.
This is such an important point that you're making here, because also in terms of the arc of how this Patriot Party kind of ends up getting covered, because I think right now it's getting set up, at least in some media narratives right now, that okay, the Patriot Party, will it be a thing or not? Right. And then eventually when it collapses on its own grift, maybe, again, that's a shot, that is a direction that it could certainly set up to go. And then people will be like, see, it was nothing, but it couldn't do anything. This is like, we're back to our 2-party system. Meanwhile, the Proud Boys have picked up like several hundred members. Right. And that's really like, as you mentioned, that's the pipeline. And if you look at, the history of kind of like how white nationalist groups, how other extremist organizations, how the Klan operated, it's the same exact pattern, right?
That's a perfect example. The Klan is a fantastic example, because in the second iteration of the Klan, this is actually this is a perfect example, Kevin. This is awesome. Because the second Klan, which I'm sure started off as a grift. Started off as a way to sell rings and T-shirts and parties. And I think at that point there were like 5 million Americans in the Klan. And they did it because it was like a white people's fraternity. And, looking at the Patriot Party, you can see the exact same thing happening, where you're providing cover for these right-wing extremists to kind of, meet up with a bunch of MAGA people and interact with them and get to, vet them and know how radical they are and try and radicalize them a little bit more. And then maybe you can pull them into your cool adult frat drinking club. And that actually, and then you guys can hang out in plate carriers out front of the Capitol. And it's very clearly what they're doing, and it has absolute precedent. You're totally right.
Absolutely. So we've got these folks too, and so if they end up running, like what I find fascinating too, I was poking around a little bit, kind of after rereading your piece ahead of today. I was poking around a little bit on Stokowski, right? Stokowski. I always get his name wrong, but as his page, what's fascinating about the way that he crafts himself on social media too as well, it's like, it's like all hip and all kind of like, a little bit like a 50s greaser, that, you're kind of like, maybe you're kind
He
of
loves that he looks like Johnny Depp.
well, that's just it, right? It's like, great. It's like Johnny Depp crossed with West Side Story, but with all this, very conscious identity crafting, right? About coolness, right? And that becomes part of, like, once again, becomes one of the covers for kind of bringing people in, because people want to be liked, right? If you can like the cool kid on the block is going to be kind of like give you some attention, come on in.
Yeah, and I describe him as a QAnon influencer, which I think is like, kind of something that is very new and has really had no time to build up, but has kind of like built itself organically as the QAnon community continues to siphon off from different disparate communities on the internet. There are people who are from the New Age community and who are from, like the online film community, which is where Stokowski's from. It has this insane ability to pull people in. It's actually interesting. One of the reactionary groups that the Proud Boys were meeting up with in Marconi was called the Gravy Seals. And, they're South Philly reactionaries. They're Italians. They love Christopher Columbus. One of them, the main ones, Ronnie Teeny, his sister is a QAnon influencer in Los Angeles with like 35,000 followers. And so it all kind of connects, and the thing about QAnon influencers that's really interesting to me is that, like you said, they are kind of shading it in this kind of aesthetic of, it's cool to be QAnon, it's cool to be a Trump supporter. It's cool to, be on these Facebook groups. And it's especially interesting to me because I doubt that Schwetz and Stokowski know that each other exist. But they're entirely dedicated to the Patriot Party grip.
Really? That's interesting.
They operate on totally different platforms. Like Stokowski is entirely on Facebook. He loves Facebook. He's been trying to make Patriot Party groups work for months now, and they keep getting deleted. But that's where his audience is. I think he's got an audience of about 5,000 people there between like 2 or 3 active Facebook channels, which is bigger than Schwetz's audience. Schwetz is very much, I think there's like 400 people in the Patriot Party PA group and about 600 people in the Lehigh Valley Proud Boys group. And so
600 people, did you say? 600?
I think so. Yeah, maybe 400 to 600 is somewhere.
That's still pretty
I don't
substantial
know it's substantial.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit smaller than the Philadelphia Proud Boys chat, which I think is about 1,100 followers. And, a lot of those are lurkers. A lot of those are people like me who are, collecting information on them. But it is a significant following. But Stokowski's following is much larger. But I doubt that they know each other exist because they have totally diametrically opposed views of what the Patriot Party should be, except that they're both grifters. That is the only thing that like connects the two of them. There's no reason that they would both be in this party except that they're trying to make money off these people. And they are the two different futures of the Patriot Party. There is a huge ideological battle going on right now with the Patriot Party between QAnon and Western chauvinism in general. Like the Proud Boys and the Groypers, the Patriot Front, that kind of stuff. They just serve as such perfect foils of each other without even knowing that each other exists, that it's just incredibly interesting to me. And Stokowski is, I think, less radical than Schwetz is. Like I said, he's an influencer. He was happy to be at the rallies, but I didn't see any video of him actually like storming the Capitol. He's using it for likes and to get clicks and like that, and to make money selling T-shirts. And it's very similar to what Schwetz is doing. But it's much more online inward focused, which is very much the QAnon thing,
Well, and I would say too as well is like when I see Stokowski's work, it's like I look at him and I say, here's somebody who grew up on Milo, right? I mean,
absolutely.
He seems like cut from like that cloth. Where when you look at Schwetz, like he's the kind of person that makes me super concerned. Right, because they're doing, and again, a lot of the Proud Boy chapters have done this. Right, they do this on the ground organizing. And I remember, growing up in a kind of central New York, Utica, New York, and then kind of living in Syracuse for a while. There used to be a military base. Fort Drum was kind of not far from Syracuse, New York, and you had a group of these kind of white supremacist neo-Nazis, right, who were kind of enlisted soldiers at Fort Drum who used to come down right into Syracuse in their time off, and that's what they would do. They would recruit. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they were all about this kind of like, one-to-one contact, like making a show of things, being kind of like out there wanting to fight. Right. But also looking for those kind of stragglers of those people that they could actually bring into the fold as kind of influencers. And that's what this guy reminds me of.
Yeah, absolutely. And he, I'm sure he's a nice guy,
Whatever.
but like
mean,
he is serving as kind of like a useful idiot for these people. He's drawing people into further radicalization of the right wing without showing them any of the other stuff. It's all about, save the children. It's all about, protect the country, protect the president, that kind of stuff. But once you are in those groups, you're going to be invited into more radical groups. Eventually, you're going to be courted for those. And that's where you get, the, follow the cabal stuff and the hardcore white supremacy that is really at the base of this entire coalition of MAGA supporters. It's really like that, and their support for Donald Trump are the only two things binding them together. And it is Dave Stukowski is a danger in that he puts on a pretty face for QAnon and for the Patriot Party in general, which is not what they are.
Yeah, 100%. And so this might be a little bit kind of beyond even kind of a knowability at this point, or kind of thought about this. But, if you kind of look at, say, the Patriot Party as kind of one, say, resting ground for this stuff, I mean, do you see any other similar kinds of developments out there that are kind of like ready to receive, so to speak? Or I mean, I've been of the mind of like, look, the Patriot Party is the one we're kind of naming it as a kind of a pointing place at this point, because that's where they're jockeying for this. But we could very much, just like with QAnon, see something that's completely new, right? Kind of emerge from the edges that is going to kind of come in. Do you have any sense of that?
Well, I think that, and like you said, it's difficult to tell, but we're going to find out pretty soon. I think by 2022, we'll know for sure. But the Patriot Party has the most momentum right now. It seems to have the most members. But there is also conversations in Telegram chats and, outside of Patriot Party groups as to whether or not it's sufficiently radical. That seems to be the main concern, as opposed to, this is full of Proud Boys and QAnon. Like, is that bad? No, they're not third positionists. They believe in the electoral process. They believe that the thing for them to do is to achieve, state and local government. Like, honestly, I think if we get the Patriot Party as a final result from all this, we'll be fine, because they are at least, not at the point where they're ready to do mass violence. They're much more focused on, local politics. But, when 2022 comes, if they don't do well, if they aren't perceived as doing as well as patriots would probably like them to, then there will be a new thing. But I don't think that there's anything online right now that is a receiver. There's a lot of givers, like the constitutionalists are providing a lot of stuff to QAnon people to build that conspiracy. But I don't think that there's anyone that's actively recruiting as much as the Patriot Party and the Proud Boys. And they exist, in a coalescence. So it's all about, whatever comes out of the Patriot Party is probably going to be the next big thing. But I think it's too soon to really know for sure. But like, it's going to come. It's out there.
Yeah. I mean, well, one of my reads on the Patriot Party is kind of, in this kind of like Russian nesting dolls of grift kind of model, where you have, there's a segment, I think, of, elected officials now, kind of Republican Party on a national score, who actually see the grift of the Patriot Party as a way of kind of maintaining and kind of bolstering their own power, because it's a threat to the Republican establishment, right? It's a way of kind of like tamping down any kind of voices of moderation within the Republican Party, by basically saying, hey, look, if you don't come this way, the Patriot Party is going to split our party, and then the Republican Party is done for 2 generations. So I think those folks are actually looking at the Patriot Party as a certain kind of leverage. The problem is, of course, with that grift within the grift, because now you've got like the Patriot Party who've got their own grift going, but there's a whole bunch of true believers and organizers that once they sniff that the elected officials, what they're seeing as Republicans who have sold out, the rhinos, right, are trying to use the Patriot Party as a way to kind of bolster their own, popularity, their own power. Those folks are going to be ready to go someplace else that's more radical.
Absolutely. These people are very disaffected. They've a lot of them believe that the Republican Party sold them out, that, everyone but Trump is against them. And that's, once again, the Republican universe circles around Trump like a black hole. Everything depends on what he does. So if he ends up moving away from the Patriot Party, which is what he signaled, he signaled that he doesn't want to build a third party. He'd much rather primary Republicans who are in office. If that happens, then there is more of a chance that the Patriot Party will fade away and be replaced by something else. But if he decides to throw his weight behind them, then that is a disaster for the Republican Party. It will destroy them. Because I would imagine that he could get 30 to 35% of the vote easily with the Patriot Party, and the Republican Party could not survive that. So it's in their best interest to court Trump and the people who support him, which means QAnon, and continue to draw from that voter base. Because, the Republicans are the minority now. They can't afford to lose a single vote. They need to do whatever it takes to get as many voters as possible. And that means doing what Trump wants. It's not, what they're signaling right now. It wasn't what they were signaling at the J6 riots, where they were like, we're done with Trump. We have no more interest in this. But they don't have a choice, because either Trump joins with them and they become the party of QAnon because those are his supporters, or he leaves and joins the Patriot Party, and the Patriot Party becomes the party of QAnon, and the Republican Party collapses. Yep. Those are the only two things that can happen here.
Well, there we go. Well, we in a kind of minute, I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to talk a little about kind of the media landscape here. But before I do, just kind of want to give a couple little announcements here, a little break. I want to remind you, listen to Raging Chickens Out to Coop Live, and you can help support this podcast and support everything we do by going to patreon.com/rcpress. You become a member for those $5 a month. Just, kind of chip in where you can. And if you don't want to become kind of a patron right at this point, but you want to throw us a little tip in our tip jar, you can actually go over to paypal.me/rcpress and throw us a couple bucks here and there. But what you could do for us right now, especially if you're watching live on YouTube, you make sure you hit that subscribe button, you hit that like button for the episode, and you hit that bell to make sure that every time that we go live, that it's there, you can help kind of join the show. And want to give you some programming notes here a little bit. This coming Monday and Out to Coop Live, I'm welcoming Sean O'Leary to the show. Sean O'Leary is a senior researcher with the Ohio River Valley Institute. You may have kind of seen this report that's come out. The Philly Inkies basically kind of gave them a huge shout out in their their anti-fracking editorial. Right. Well, I mean, that's probably a little far, but whatever. I mean, well, I'm gonna push it if I can. Right. But so he'll be on there talking about the new report that's coming out from them called Appalachia's Natural Gas Counties, the Natural Gas Fracking Boom and Appalachia's Lost Economic Decade. And, that one will be on both on the Podbean app and on kind of YouTube. So you can actually call in that night on Monday. And for the first ever, you're hearing it this first time, right? I've been teasing this last couple show, but on Monday, March 8th, right? That's a week from this coming Monday. I'm welcoming State Representative Elizabeth Fiedler and State Senator Nikhil Saval to the show. And we're going to be talking about the people's budget and progressive organizing in PA. Like we've been talking about on Out to Coop Live now for a while, as it seems like, especially after this election, we've seen like Pennsylvania no longer has a squad, right? We've got a battalion building, progressive kind of elected officials in here that are connected to social movements. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that on March 8th. Once again, that'll be on Podbean app and the YouTube channel as well. So if you can get out there and support the show by going to patreon.com/rcpress and show us some love. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel right now too as well. I used to suck at this stuff, and now I'm just like, whatever. It's like random. I was like, I hate saying those things, but
and definitely check that out. Nikhil Saval especially is a revelation. He is fantastic. It's going to be so cool to have them on the show.
Well, it's going to be awesome to have those two on the show. We had Rick Kajewski on the show back in the fall, kind of like ahead of the election. And, literally I was going through the kind of list of folks I'd like to kind of include in that discussion. I'm like, man, it's just going to get unwieldy because it's just like, we got so many folks here. So, I mean, I can't wait to talk to them. I know Sean Kitchen actually, back in before, when Elizabeth Fiedler, Summer Lee, and Sarah Innamorato first ran, because it was the first kind of like chink in the, the dike that's breaking, of kind of like open of like old school Pennsylvania politics. Sean Kitchen interviewed them in Harrisburg, and ahead of them. And, people were telling, Sean kept on saying, is like, they're going to win. And people were like laughing at him, like, yeah, whatever, man. Keep dreaming, lefty.
I don't know.
And, Elizabeth Fiedler, like, I know that she's been doing nothing but kind of digging in Philadelphia, helping support kind of other candidates and campaigns, which has been fantastic. I know that she and Nikhil Saval have worked together really closely with Rick Kajewski and other folks within the community. It's been absolutely fantastic. And, I just go around the state to see what's going on. I mean, some races we lost this past year, but I mean, the movements keep on growing as candidates actually come out with, like, something to say and a program that's actually for people, as opposed to, what we normally are used to here. But
definitely.
But anyways, that's far stream from our conversation. But yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Looking forward to talking to Sean O'Leary this coming Monday too as well. But one of the things I wanted to kind of give you a second, you sent me this piece ahead of the show today from CNN. I had not seen this yet, where CNN was actually kind of digging into the Patriot Party, particularly what's going on in Harrisburg. And it kind of like prompted us a little kind of like pre-show discussion about how we should cover this stuff kind of in the media. But, can you give us a little bit of a background of that CNN piece and kind of like a contrast of like, how, like what we do kind of on the left, progressive left, even the broad left, if you want to say it like this, to be thinking about how we should be covering these and how we should not be covering these things, or what kind of actually media coverage is actually a disservice to what needs to happen right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The CNN piece, it came out yesterday. It was written, among other people, by Elle Reeve, who was on the scene there. And obviously, like, she did fantastic on the scene work. It's nice to see this stuff covered at all. And so, like, I want to preface with that, at least they are paying attention. But the response that I saw, obviously I'm in these chats, and they were exuberant, that it had happened. They were very excited. It emboldened them in a way that concerned me a little bit and made me think a lot about.
Let's be clear. By them, you mean here like the Proud Boys and the right and things like that.
Proud Boys and the Patriot Party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
They were like, there's photos on my Twitter, but it's thank you, Dick, for doing all this for us. You got us on CNN, even though they hate CNN. They're always like so excited to be on it. And it raised an interesting question of how exactly should we, like you said, how should we be covering these people? What is emboldening them and what is keeping them from doing things that are more dangerous, that don't make them want to escalate their activities. And I don't pretend to have the answer. I try to cover them granularly and very closely, and kind of recognizing what they are. The Proud Boys are a SLPC designated hate group. I don't reach out to them for comment. I don't speak to them. I have no interest in hearing their opinion about about anything really. And seeing the way that CNN covered it gave them much more of a platform than I probably would have appreciated. I think that it's very important that we don't allow these people to speak about their policies on their own terms, because we've learned this is the same lesson that the media was supposed to learn during the Trump era. They had 4 years to learn this lesson, that platforming these people specifically, not covering them, platforming, allowing them to talk freely about their views to your audience is a disservice as a journalist. Obviously, they should be given the ability to speak, to do whatever they want, but it doesn't free them from the consequences of those actions or from being covered in a way that those actions portray. Schwetz talks a good game. He's very charming. He loves that his name makes people laugh, and he uses that to raise his campaign. But he's a violent guy. He has a criminal record. He is on video in December attacking journalists with the Proud Boys. I watched him attack journalists with the Proud Boys at Marconi. I was threatened by a bunch of his friends there. They followed me back to my car. And when you're covering them, you can't be allowing them to push their platform. It has to be more about them than it is with them. And I think that the CNN article had a lot of Schwetz in it, a lot of him explaining what the Proud Boys were. And, obviously, like, a lot of that stuff was still not very good for them. They're gonna spin it whatever way they can. But, there's a scene in that video that is just astounding to me where they come up after the rally back to the parking lot where the Proud Boys, or where the Patriot Party is. And some of them have changed into Proud Boys outfits, Lehigh Valley Proud Boys sweaters. And it's because they claim that their cars were vandalized. There are videos of nails under their tires and stuff, but nothing more than that really. And Elle Reeve asks Schwetz, she's like, why are the Proud Boys here? Why did they know how to come here? And he says, I don't know. I don't know those guys. And that is not good for them. Because you would think that they would want to know, like, whether or not their literal leader actually supports them or even acknowledges that they exist to a CNN crew. He says he doesn't know them. He's the leader. He's on. I have screen grab videos of that Telegram page where he says, "I am a Proud Boy. I have been a Proud Boy for a long time, and I will always be a Proud Boy." So, like, that doesn't look good for them, and that's something that I want to cover because it proves that these people don't actually care about the communities that they're building. Dick Schwetz is a grifter, and he wants to make money off this, and he wants to be popular. And so portraying him in a way that, legitimizes his political views, continues to legitimize the same political views that he's had for 4 years, is the same mistake that the media made with Trump. It's allowing these people to feel like their ideas are being heard and being considered seriously, which I don't believe that they should be.
Well, and I think you couldn't have said this better. I mean, this is like, I think this is right on the money about making distinction. I like how you put this has to be more about them than with them. Because what happened, the minute you plug somebody into the let's see this side and let's see that side, once you plug them into that kind of reporting format, right, then you've basically affirmed them as a legitimate contributor to that discourse. Right. I mean, that's how I look at this. Is like once you've included them as well, here's one side of the story. Let's see what's on the other side. Who's to know? The truth is probably somewhere in between. Well, somewhere in between right now gets a lot of people hurt. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I look at this and I say, that's precisely the issue. And I think that this is a really knotty problem. And I remember Rick Perlstein kind of a couple years back had a piece that was talking about this a little bit, about watching the destruction of American institutions, particularly ones that we need, things like real journalism, right? That's not just a kind of the both sidersism reporting, but actually has to make decisions about how things are covered, and then be willing to accept these criticisms, because this is the kind of stuff. Well, why would you not platform? Why would you give the equal space to someone like the Proud Boys to cover, to hear what they've got to say, when it's pretty clear these are people who should stand outside the boundaries, right, of kind of what we consider as acceptable within a democratic context. Like you said, you want to speak about this garbage, you're going to speak about it, right? There's a constitutional protection that gives you that particular right. But God knows if we have any kind of institutional respect for democracy, right? And I mean, using that in the broadest sense, is that, there's certain things that one has to defend. And that is when people are talking about the destruction of the very thing that you're supposedly upholding, they are outside the bounds, and we have to expose them as, say, corrupting influences and ones that are seeking for the downfall of the thing that we claim to love.
Absolutely. And it's as old as fascism itself. You
Exactly.
can go back to the very basic writings of Nazi propagandists who explicitly say that freedom of speech, it is important. I want to baseline that everyone should have freedom of speech. But Nazis will specifically use freedom of speech to push their ideas and take advantage of that. And so as a society, we need to be listening to these ideas and being like, this is outside of our political paradigm. It was really politically and socially unpopular to be a Trump supporter for about 4 years. And then J6 happened. And now you are outside. You don't have any respect for our basic institutions of democracy. And so you're outside of the political conversation, and I shouldn't be expected to consider your ideas like they are equal to, other less politically destructive ideas, because you're talking about the foundations of our democracy. And that is something that matters to a lot of people. And you need to be willing to defend that at the expense of, hearing this one person's opinion. He can give it, he can say it all he wants, but it doesn't mean that you have to listen, And I think that that's very important when you're talking about the Proud Boys and about the Patriot Party in particular, because they've learned this lesson. Schwetz loves when people report on him. He loves when they make fun of his name. He loves when he gets these little, snippets in news coverage, because it legitimizes him and it legitimizes his group's goals, and so we need to be unflinching in being, these ideas are wrong. We need to be, I don't know. I think that I receive sometimes some criticism from good journalists who are, I think that sometimes you editorialize a little bit. I think sometimes you have, a bias against right-wing people. And I have a bias against right-wing extremism.
I'll just say,
I have a bias against that because it's damaging to our society. And I think that our society should be, something that is protected and nurtured, not something that we're actively looking to destroy and replace with totalitarian rule. And that's what these people want. They love the boot on their neck. They are happy to do whatever it takes to get to that position. And I don't think that we should be considering those ideas seriously as part of the political discussion. They can have them, but it doesn't mean that I have to cover them like they're equal to, Bernie Sanders or even Joe Biden. They are not the same.
Right, and I also think that it's really important, some of the things that you were just talking about there. Like, I think that especially this moment right now in history calls for a kind of a broader kind of range of journalistic practice right now, right? Because I will be the first one that will defend, like, the, say the institutional press, right? That basically saying that are doing best to do the objective reporting to kind of say, describe what's going on, dig into things, and kind of not be kind of like, say, quote unquote bias. I hate this, even to frame this discussion in this
paradigm.
way.
I agree with you.
Right, exactly. I mean, it was just whatever, but just put that aside. Like, the idea that, a journalistic practice where you're trying to kind of like look at something as kind of like wide-eyed and kind of clear as possible without kind of like starting from a judgment on it, right? And I do think that's absolutely critical. But right, that works best in a context where you have a rich and a vibrant kind of journalistic practice, where you have kind of all sorts of analysis coming from kind of different kinds of directions, right? And look, there's a lot of people on the that are in the right press or some more conservative press who I would defend the work they're doing. I fundamentally disagree with what they're doing. Like, I fundamentally disagree with their positions and their ideas and things like this, but they're not fanning the flames of like fascism, right? And so I can kind of like, whatever, respect, if you want to use that word or whatever. I could say, okay, that's within these bounds. But these folks that we're talking about here today are so far beyond that. And I do think there has to be a kind of, again, you go back to kind of muckraking traditions, right? They basically said, like, I don't give a shit about your objectivity right now. Right. We've got a bigger problem. There's people that are dying in the meatpacking plants. Right. And like, hearing like the perspective of the PR of the factory is just not going to cut it. No pun intended. Right. So, I mean, this is I think the moment that we're in is that we need folks that are going to grab on, right, and not let go, and kind of expose this stuff and track it down with the full acknowledgement. Say, okay, yeah, like, I cover this stuff, I focus on this, I invite you to this show, but I'm not going to invite these nut jobs to the show, right? Precisely because yes, I have an agenda and a perspective and so on, right? But we need people that are going to dig in on that to be part of that conversation, because look, there is no other infrastructure at this point to do this work in my mind.
You're exactly right, and I think there not being the infrastructure to support this kind of work makes it really critical that we re-examine our role as journalists and continue to question whether or not we should be supporting actively institutions, regardless of whether or not we have a bias. Journalism for me is all about speaking truth to power. The most important thing that you can be doing is talking for someone who does not have a voice in society, and this actually like relates back to some coverage that I did earlier this year on the James Talib Dean homeless encampment in Philadelphia.
Yep.
And that was what really like set that in focus for me, was that like, how am I supposed to have an unbiased opinion on this? How am I supposed to have an unbiased opinion on the city clearly not doing anything to support people who are victims of the system? That covering them in a way that presented it as a both sides argument. These people should have housing, these people shouldn't have housing. That's a false dichotomy. We have to be continually telling stories that are necessary in our communities, and we can't be thinking about, what big media publishing thinks about it, because they're not on the ground. They don't interact with these problems on a daily basis, and like I said at the beginning, they're not working with a full breadth of knowledge of the situation. Local reporters who are on the ground and who spend 6 to 8 months out of the year covering the same issues are going to have a much more informed opinion than a new national news publication that comes in 6 months later and writes one story.
Absolutely.
We on the ground, at ground level, we're very privileged to be able to take in voices that may not have been heard before. And with relation to the Proud Boys and to the Patriot Party, they are literally conservatives. They operate on the maintaining of the status quo and returning to a more conservative view of society. And when you look at American history, that is a view of society that continually disenfranchises women, LGBT people, trans people, with people of color. Those voices were not being heard. And as long as you are a political or like direct action based vanguard of that system, then I don't believe that it is in the community's best, best case to hear your opinion as if it is fact, or as if it is as valid as what the objective reporting will say. Because this is how we got into this situation. We both sides it into, QAnon being a collective delusion. You have, if both things can be true, then neither of them can be true. And
right.
We need to have an objective, community-based moral standard for what is right and what is wrong for the people that we live with. And the Proud Boys and the Patriot Party are actively attempting to disenfranchise those voices. And so I'm not going to act as if their opinion is valid. I think that they're, SLPC designated hate group members, and they should be covered that way. That's as basic as it gets. The Canadians think that they're terrorists. Whether or not that's true or not, they exist in that same paradigm. So we should be like really careful about how we cover them. And there might not be a right way to do that. Like my article may not have emboldened them in the same way, but I can't know that because I don't know if they've read it, because they're not yelling about it on their Telegram pages.
Right.
But that information is getting to people who need it. And I would much rather, have that than have them them platforming my content, because that means that I'm making them look good in some way, which is not my objective.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and I think the work that you're doing too is like also educating, folks in the progressive community too, as well, about some of these people, because a lot of the, the Proud Boys in these more extremist groups tend to kind of exist off the radar of a lot of folks, right? Not because people aren't, even people that are fairly plugged in politically, right, with kind of, issues that are going on in their communities and so on. Some of these things that are happening kind of on the fringes, right, but are nonetheless feeding directly into the most reactionary and kind of violent kind of political tendencies in our culture right now have to be exposed. So I just think the work that you're doing is just absolutely kind of like just bang up work, man.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to continue to cover it as long as there are Proud Boys in Philly. I'll be telling you what they're doing. So we can continue to hope to build that institutional local knowledge, and hope that can allow, bigger corporations and people to make decisions in the future that are fully informed from the community.
Well, man, awesome. Well, man, as you continue to do your work, I hope you come back on the show. I'd love to have you back on at some point, kind of talk about your reporting down the road. Like we said at the top of the show, the more we kind of build out these networks and connections, I think the better off we're all going to be. And we've talked about this in Out the Coop quite a bit, where we see that, and I think we should celebrate the kind of the victories that we're having, and say the electeds that we've kind of gotten in, the expanding of the squad to the battalion here in PA, right? Getting progressive left folks kind of elected are really able to accomplish things. But we are sitting here in the kind of the broader progressive community have our roles here too as well, to help out build the infrastructure here, because it's not all about what's happening in the house, it's also happening what's outside in the streets. So I appreciate the work so much, and I appreciate kind of like coming on the show too. It's been I'm so glad this worked out, because your stuff is fantastic, and more power to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And your stuff is fantastic as well. We're really excited to continue to work with you guys and with RC in the future. So it's going to be an awesome ride.
You can bet 100%. So I'll tell you what, you can check out, if you're listening live, make sure, I've got to say it once again, if you're listening right now on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the like button for this episode. Make sure, right down there, make sure you kind of get this out, because the more that you get the subscriptions, you hit that like button, it pops up in the algorithm, and we help to amplify the voices like Jordan Hopkins that we have here today. Want to remind you once again, check out his stuff. It goes to www.itsalienmuse.com. That's itsalienmuse.com. You can follow him on Twitter at JHOP. That's JHOP_PHL. His stuff on Twitter, if you're not following him on Twitter, you should be doing that right now. Like, I'll wait while you bring up your Twitter account and you make sure that you're following him right now, because that's where the action is. You can follow this stuff step by step, and please kind of give him that much more of a push out there, because we need to have his words out. So thanks again for coming to the show.
My chronic posting.
Yes. Yeah, do you sleep, actually? Can I say that? All right, man. Well, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Thanks for joining in. Want to remind you that you can become a patron of this show by going to patreon.com/rcpress. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month. If you wanted to give us a one-time donation, just go to paypal.me/rcpress. Jordan, thanks so much, man. And can get back out there, man. We need you.
Thank you, Kevin. Have a good one.
All right, you got it. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. If you're listening to this on the podcast, make sure that you're going to stay with us for Out to Cook Live on Monday with Sean O'Leary. Man, I love this show. Thank you.
Fantastic, man. So great to talk with you.